So back in my day, no, I'm not going to do that. I bet some of the young ones here were already beginning to roll their eyes discreetly, right? Back in my day. I know my kids, my young adult kids would roll their eyes. Like many other young adults, they make us aware of how we cling to the past. They make fun of our back in my day quotes. So I wanted to share a meme with you that my kids have shared with us. Back in my day, we didn't have stomachs, right? And here's one that reminded me of what my parents used to say, something very similar to me, right? We had to walk 20 miles. For my dad, they had to tie up a goat before they went to school. One day I asked my grandparents, and my grandfather's like, we never had goats, right? But we like to think about the past like that. We like to go back in my day. We want to cling to things that we remember as being fun. We had the best years of our lives back in my day. Or maybe not. Maybe back in my day, we want to remember the hardships. We didn't like them then, but we want to share how now they have made us resilient and strong. And we mourn that children or young adults these days didn't have those hardships that we have had that made us into the good people that we are today. And we wish that those young people could experience those things too. Some of us wish those things could have stayed the way they are. We remember mostly the good things. But of course, those back in my day things cannot stay the same. And of course, they were not always just good. The thing about back in my day is that we can do that with our faith as well, right? We want to hold on to our understanding of faith that made us feel safe and secure. We want to hold on to the experiences of church that made us feel the people we are today. But I think this passage, more importantly, Jesus, is calling us to something more than just a back in my day experience. Last week, we looked at our faith journey, like stages of faith journeys from Brian McLaren's book. And it's not that one stage is better than another. It's not that we have more faith in one stage than another, but it's that we're called to examine how we have come to faith. We're called to examine what we have learned. We're called to take everything that we thought we knew about God and see it through a Christological lens, which is a fancy way of saying we're just supposed to see it in a way that Jesus taught us to be. Tradition isn't a bad thing. I'm not saying just do away with tradition. We're called to learn from the past. We're called to learn from our back in our day moments. We're called to hold on to whatever it is that draws us near to God. But we're also called to not get fixed upon those things. If you've been with us for this entire series, then you know that we've been kind of working our way through the song, Come Thou Fount, right? And so this week we're looking at I'm fixed upon it. And when the song refers to that, we're talking about being fixed upon God. And so we're going to also look at it from that perspective too. But sometimes we can get fixed upon other things. We can get fixed upon our traditions. We can get fixed on our back in my day things. But Jesus is telling us to not do that. Jesus made it abundantly clear when he was talking to the disciples as he journeyed through Galilee into Jerusalem. He said to them, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." In other words, I know what you learned back in your day, and maybe it served you well then, but now I am here. So stop being fixed upon how you learned things. I want you to fix your understanding upon me. I want you to fix your understanding of these things through me. In fact, in Matthew 5, he says to them, For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And it's not that he was putting down all the Pharisees. It's not that he was putting down all the scribes. But what Jesus meant is that we're to take those laws that we have been taught by the scribes and Pharisees and see them differently. To see that God's idea of following the laws isn't about ticking boxes, but it's about uplifting others. It's about how we treat others. The laws were not about getting into heaven or not getting into heaven only. In fact, I would even say it wasn't really about that. It's about our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. And they had to slowly unlearn that. They had to slowly unlearn the things they had learned back in their day. But there was something else that they needed to let go of. Another back in my day moment. And it was their understanding of the Messiah. The Old Testament understanding of the Messiah is a multifaceted one. It reflects the hopes and the struggles and the prophetic visions of the Israelite people over the centuries. The term Messiah, as many of you probably know, comes from the word Mashiach, meaning anointed one or chosen one. And in the context of the Old Testament, it usually referred to the consecration of someone specific for a God-given role, like a priest or a king. But over time, the concept evolved to encompass the expectations of a future leader sent by God to deliver Israel, to establish righteousness, to bring peace, and even to bring Israel back to its former glory. So, of course, Peter, whose story we have been following throughout our Lenten period, Peter the rock, pulls Jesus aside and he forbids Jesus. He rebukes Jesus. He tells Jesus, oh no, you've got it wrong. You're not supposed to be suffering and dying. Back in my day, we were taught that the Messiah is somebody who is going to come and reign and bring glory. And you cannot do that if you're suffering and dying. And yes, it was out of care and concern for Jesus, but also it was out of worry. It was out of fear, and it was out of confusion for Jesus and what all these things that Jesus was saying to them. It was truly a back in my day understanding of the Messiah. And when he pulled Jesus aside, I imagine maybe Peter thought Jesus was going to go, oh, Peter, how sweet are you? You're so worried for me. Or maybe he might have praised him like he did before. Of course, Peter, you're the rock. I'm so bad. I got it wrong and you got it right. But instead, Jesus says to him, get behind me, Satan. He's not calling him the devil. He's saying, you're a stumbling block. You're a hindrance to me. Your mind is not on divine things. Your mind is on those back in my day human things. And I can imagine Peter must have looked at Jesus in shock. Who, me? Satan? But remember last Sunday? Well, it was last Sunday for us. Remember last Sunday I was blessed by you for calling you Messiah? Remember I was a rock? How did I go from rock to stumbling block? Well, we also talked last week that Peter answered Jesus correctly, but he didn't understand correctly. He answered correctly that Jesus is a Messiah, but he didn't understand correctly what Jesus Messiah meant. His back in my day view of the Messiah challenged what Jesus was telling him. And it wouldn't have surprised me if Peter decided to walk away at this moment. I'm done. This is not what I signed up for. I didn't sign up for a Messiah who's going to suffer and die. He'd forgotten the resurrect part. I walked away from my life as a fisherman. I walked away from my family and how I make a living. I've traveled all over Galilee with you. I'm heading towards Jerusalem with you. And now you're telling me it was for nothing? Now you're telling me you're going to suffer and die? What about the glory of being the Messiah? I'm following you because you were supposed to bring glory to Israel. I'm done. I'm going back to my boat. It's surprising that Peter didn't do that. I mean, imagine if everything you knew about your faith was turned on its head. What would you have done? Well, I think we've already seen it. We've already seen different responses to our faith being turned on our head. I think the stages of faith that we saw also can represent our faith being turned on our head. Many people today have encountered upheaval and crisis in their faith. And some of them have had their worlds unraveled and their beliefs tested. In response, some have clung even tighter to their back in their day understanding, to their religious laws. They build walls around themselves, and others have simply walked away. But Peter, to his credit, when Jesus foretells his death, it's a shock to his system. It's a shock to everything he learned back in his day. And he does protest, but he doesn't walk away. Even though he's fixed on the way he thinks things should go, he doesn't want to let go of that expectation of the Messiah, but he has this trust in him. And so he stays. Jesus' suffering and death is like an inconvenient truth for Peter. And so Peter naturally wants to take the path with less pain, the path of the world, the path about bringing glory to the nation. And there's some of that still built in Christianity today, bringing glory to the nation. So I want to ask you, as Christians today, what is an inconvenient truth for us? Where would we want to cling to our easy answers? Where would we want to fix ourselves on the simplistic glory that we think Christianity will bring? And what is Jesus calling us to re-examine? Too often, Christians have made the teaching of Jesus into what we want it to be. We want it to be nationalistic. We want it to be about control. We want it to be simply about who is saved and who is not. One thing that has been in my mind, bubbling in my mind for a while now, is that term evangelism. We have turned the word evangelized into something that divides people. We have used it to divide Christians. We have described ourselves as evangelical or non-evangelical. And the origin of the word evangelize simply means to bring good news. And Jesus, whose eyes we always need to look at everything through, Jesus understands good news or gospel simply as announcing the coming of God's arrival here on earth. Jesus' teachings and his actions reveal the good news as encompassing, yes, spiritual salvation, but so much more than spiritual salvation. The transformation of social and economic and personal realities for all people is part of God's good news. Jesus' understanding of the good news was comprehensive. It addressed the whole human experience. His good news was a message of hope, of transformation and redemption. It invited individuals not only into personal connection with each other, but with God. Not in isolation, but in community, living under God's loving rule, embodying God's justice and peace and love in the world. Jesus' good news meant when we see injustice, we speak out against it. And yet, we have taken that word evangelize to be something divisive, to look at people as who's a real Christian and who is not. Being evangelical, as Jesus calls us to do it, not as how we have fixed our human minds on it, is not easy. It calls us to grow in our faith in ways that lies outside of simply understanding the rules. But growing in our faith comes with challenges and complexity. So we need to decide, as Peter had to decide, are we going to fix our minds on human things, or are we going to fix our minds on Jesus? Can we stay rooted in the convictions of Jesus even while we're loosening our grips on things that we have been fixated on because our faith back in the day told us that was the way. You got to give Peter credit. He immediately faces a reality that challenges his understanding of Jesus and faith itself. Get behind me, Satan. And yet he continues to walk with Jesus. Whereas maybe before he just answered the question correctly, yes, you are the Messiah. Now he's continuing to journey with Jesus to understand what it means to be the Messiah correctly. I think it reminds us that sometimes we have well-intentioned desires to protect and preserve our understanding of things, to protect and preserve our understanding of faith. And those understandings become stumbling blocks to fulfilling our calling as disciples, followers of Christ. Like Peter, we might have inconvenient truths that we have to face. We have to drop our preconceived notions. Jesus' response to Peter reminds us of our important commitment to God's mission, even when it's difficult. Evangelize doesn't mean to remind people that they are sinners or not, depending on what we think the commandments tell us to believe or not believe. Evangelizing tells us that we are called to give the good news that God's kingdom is here and God's love is for all people. And I hope that, like Peter, we embrace the transformative power of faith. So what I'm going to do is invite you to look at a few questions that I have up there. Maybe discuss it with each other for a bit. We're going to take one question at a time. And then maybe you can give some feedback to me on how this passage has spoken to you. The first question you're going to ask is, what are you fixed upon in your own life? How do your personal ambitions, fears, or expectations align with or diverge from the path that Jesus lays out for his followers? So take a few minutes, talk to each other, and then let's hear some responses to that. You can turn around and face each other.
No, I came here just a few minutes.
Okay. You want to join a group or anything? All right. Should I volunteer a table, or is there a table I'd like to volunteer an answer? I'm going to volunteer that table. Would anybody like to be a spokesperson? What was your summary? And do you want to come up to the mic so that maybe you're still working? Anybody feels ready? Anybody wants to come up to the mic, because we have people on YouTube who are listening? All right. But now we have... That's good. That's good that we have multiple responses. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Mark and I were sitting there talking, trying to figure out what we're best to find. And I guess it's just being able to turn things over. She's trying to find new places to go, new groups to be involved in. And so we're both on the same journey path, but also knowing that there are days when we just feel like the merry-go-round going on with things that are putting us down. And it's just like, stop the merry-go-round, we want to get off. And it doesn't seem to stop when we want it to stop. And so that's a struggle for us.
All right, thank you. Oh, okay. That's because I spoke, my bad.
Anyways, I want to be careful. I don't want to speak for the whole group, but when we did mention, we tried to break this question down. I didn't take the monitor without taking it with another. It's an awful lot to take in such a short period of time. So I thought that was valid, so we thought, well, let's break it down into small pieces. And so we asked the question, what are you fixed upon in your own life? And Phil said, well, we looked around them. Isabel and Sharon here, and then students, and we saw that there's a lot of pressure. You're taking care of yourself, you're taking care of your studies, and then you're also taking care of your family and grandchildren as well as them. So then we thought, how can we break that second part up? How do your personal ambition, fears, or expectations align with or diverge from the path that Jesus lays out for scholars? We cut that sentence down. And we said, how do your personal ambitions, which is taking care of self and others, how does that align with Christ? And if we didn't get a chance, so we need another question. You can come back to it. So that's all we have to say. We might have just talked about for our people to people that are really master that learning those like in my area from our program, research we need to, you know what I mean? Like just let love and it doesn't matter. Being considered, learning about all of that, being categorized in there. Like when you talk about what we live and focus on Jesus and focus on the love that you get and receive, and there's all around. In the last 10 years or so, I have learned people who are being a need, and I will see them every side, and I will see them
Was there anybody else who wanted to answer that one? It is a heavy one because you guys are smart. Does anybody on YouTube input an answer that they want shared? All right, let's go to the next one. Openness to being led. So Peter thought he understood Jesus' mission, but was corrected by Jesus. How open are you to being led by God into unexpected or challenging places? And how do you discern God's direction in your life? So again, that's a multifaceted question. Pick part or the whole thing. Take a couple minutes to answer that one. Thank you. Okay, so I think it's only fair that I share as well. So when you're fixed upon your own life, I'm going back to the first one. Had your personal fears or expectations? Well, as the pastor of this church, we I fear that, the metrics that we use for church doesn't align with how UCC is. So the metrics are usually numerical and financial. And so sometimes that gets in the way for me personally, and I have to constantly put that aside and say, God is calling us to something different than your typical metrics. And so have faith in God that God is leading UCC down a path that is different, and that we are called to align ourselves to that difference, that God is calling us to what we used to believe church was and what church is going to look like. So openness to being led. Who would like to share what they have talked about at their table? I already told the music team that I'm going to pick on them. So,
So I heard talk about how we really like our routines and like being comfortable. So it can be really hard to try and go with unexpected or challenging places. We talked about how in doing that it can be really hard to discern whether it's unexpected and challenging for a good reason or a bad reason. So how do we discern if God's direction in our lives? We talked about, at least for me, that there's often a sense of peace that comes with these decisions, that even when they're really exciting and routine and really hard, it brings a sense of peace still. That's what I heard.
Thank you. Oh no.
Different places for work. And when St. is closed, I'm really, I didn't know where to go. Dying where you come here. And so that first morning we said, after St. Andrew's closed, and the next two had eight. And that's welcome. And I knew that this is where I should go. But I wanted to not like change because Sam told us so much in water. But I also had some challenges and attention to a Bible study through showing some forcing to look at things in to take this step and do those challenges. And the same with Mark, we talked about that in one of the churches, they had clips where clip was at here, clip was at here, clip was at here. And you go like one, trying to go like to with you. So I'm going through this, that I'm not sure how to serve what my life needs to do other than to get prayer. And it's okay, it's really questioning him, like even on there. If I'm sure that it's what so I just have trouble in that.
So we talked about, I said, life is all change and renewing. So how do you reconcile that? Generally, I think that we're not very open because we said we like our routines, we don't like the unexpected, we don't like to be challenged. But it's maybe as you get older and have had changes and challenges, and you know that you're going to be, getting through them, then you maybe can have a bit more openness to what things might be you. And then for myself personally, how I was in God's direction in my life, like I said, I've always had an issue with people who say, God spoke to me. Like, but sometimes it's true. But for me, it's more when many people in my life are sort of saying the same thing to me, telling me the same thing. God's direction as the story, the word from the one song we sang. I don't see God's direction as a plan that's outlined for us. I see God's direction as loving each other and loving God. And actually, that song had that song, the plan song, had so much good in it, like about God being with us, and that's something we can look for, and that's how I feel like any question we have, any wondering where we're to go in our lives, how we interpret Scripture. I would say 99%, we can get 100%, we can answer by saying, well, how does this help me to love God? How does this help me to love each other? And so those are, I think, simple questions that we need to go on with that.
Several times in my life I've been led to unexpected, sometimes extremely dangerous, life-threatening, and sometimes in my life totally unexpected things as life happens. And I just never really felt with a choice. If you're following what you believe in and just go in the right direction, I never really get into a problem with that. Except the first few days of regret sometimes. So, but we couldn't help, we should. But anyway,
Yeah, to answer this again, I think about my call because that was the biggest shift in my life for me back more than 11 years ago now. Before I was an accountant. I came from a mishmash family of faith, Hindu and Muslim and Sai Baba devotees all in one. And then I felt God calling me to be a Presbyterian minister. Um, and so, how do you discern God's direction in your life? Well, the way we were taught and the way that I still try to do is listen to what you think you are being led to do, but also listen to a community of faith, people you trust, listen to people who love you. And I think that's how you can discern God's direction in your life. Because I think there is that temptation to think that what you want is what God wants. And it's not always the case. So discerning is an important word there. It's taking the time to truly listen and to hear what God has to say to you through the people who surround you. I feel like I really want to give you one more. Okay, I'm going to do one more. The kingdom of God. Jesus proclaimed the coming of God's kingdom. In what ways do you see the kingdom of God at work in the world today? And how are you participating in it? this question. What is the kingdom of God? And let's ask that question. And how are you participating in it? So somebody at that table said, well, it's not a church necessarily, which is true. So where do we see the kingdom of God at work? Let me hear from somebody who hasn't spoken yet, and then you can come up. Somebody really wants Marg.
I think the kingdom of God is wherever we are helping one another. And it can be in a group or one-on-one or in church. But it's where we feel the need to assist someone or a group of other people that we're not used to seeing around. And just being kind to them and just like in student meals, we're serving young people, and it's really nice to let them know that this place and us, we are loving others.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, Ben. Ben's going to go up.
I don't remember where it is, but I know it's somewhere in one of the Gospels. Jesus says something along the lines of, whenever a group of people are gathered in my name, I'm there with them. And I think that's kind of what the kingdom of God is. It's anything like this, anytime there's a group of people, no matter how big, gather to discuss faith or to discuss Christ. And that doesn't have to be in church either. That could be anywhere anyone shows kindness. Mm-hmm. Anywhere that anyone displays God. And if they're displayed for stuff with other people, I think that's the kingdom of God. And I think that's the word.
We talked a lot about ways that we can one of the things that we thought was helping people get involved, not only here but outside, and removing working with the team going to help connections, doing helping the food cost, doing things for them, whereas the manager had a problem with the food she decided to go away, and said, oh, no, the chef. So I found the number, we packaged those, and put them in. And my mind was well, they were talking about pushing Christmas tree, that might be clear, and that clearly that will push it off, okay, in the other way. Very nice, so that was really fun, working together in the team.
Yeah, I think everybody gave wonderful answers. The kingdom of God is about bringing justice. The song that we sing comes from the Bible verse. He sent me to bring the good news to the poor, tell prisoners that they are prisoners no more, tell blind people that they can see, and set the downtrodden free. And go tell everyone that the kingdom of God has come. And that's what the kingdom of God is really about. It's about lifting up the lowly and telling those that we have previously called outcasts that in God's kingdom, they are not outcasts at all belong. Thanks for participating and answering the questions. You online, you're always free to put in your answers in there and we can read them afterwards. But we're going to invite the worship team back up to wrap us up with song.